Welcome to Make Your Own Fun. I am here with poet and host of Library Girl Reading. I've got Susan Hayden here. She is the author of the forthcoming collection from Mood Tide Press called Now You Are a Missing Person. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I've seen some videos of some of my wonderful colleagues, and I'm excited that you asked me. Thank
Oh,
you.
awesome. I was just thinking about this the other day after I talked to you. And I want to say the last time I think, because, stupid pandemic,
Yes.
last time I think I saw you in person, God, this is probably 5, 6 years ago. It may have been Library Girl or it may have been another reading, but I think you read a poem called The Zig Zag Lady about Johnny
Oh,
Cash. And I think we had a conversation about how Rick Rubin kind of like resuscitated Johnny Cash's career in the 90s with those like American recordings. And we were having the conversation of like, how the hell did he convince him to do like Rusty Cage by Soundgarden? And how did he convince him to do Hurt by Nine Inch Nails? Because it's like he had to at some point like play him the original recording by the original artist. And I'm sure Johnny Cash was like, you want to do what now?
I know. It's so funny that you mentioned that because I was somewhere the other day and I was in a restaurant with a friend and Hurt came on and I'm like, we have to stop talking. Like it was just, and she was kind of looking at me like, what is your problem? Like we were in the middle of this really
The
important
song, yeah, but
conversation.
when it has like meaning to you, when it's
Unbelievable meaning for so many reasons. But okay, so that I think was at the poetry circus because that's when I debuted that poem.
probably, yeah.
And so I read it, and it's funny because that poem is in the book, my upcoming book. And the editor of the book is this incredible poet, Bianca Stone, who lives in Vermont. So we did editorial sessions on Zoom, and we only did a handful. She wasn't like a, you know, page by page. It was a lot of it was just kind of discussing the themes and all that. Anyway, she actually asked me about that poem. She's like, "What is this about exactly?" Um, because I guess it does seem like it's about Johnny Cash, but I really wrote it about a guy. Um, I wrote it about Johnny, but I wrote it about how I felt like Johnny and
Right,
how
right, right.
I was acting that I was playing. It was playing out in a kind of relationship slash non-relationship I was having with someone. And so but Johnny was my accomplice. And yes, so it is about him, but she was asking me to give it another look, and I ended up cutting out the last line of it. So
That's
that, yeah, it's been on my mind.
that's interesting too. I've got a book coming out later this year, a poetry book, and I've this is the first time I've kind of worked with editors in terms of poetry because I've kind of just at least with poetry, just self-published before. So it's really weird, having read something at an open mic and get a great response, but then I'm sure you know this too, but on the page it flows different. People are going to take different things out of it. You show it to 16 different people, you're going to get 16 different opinions. And I'm going like, why would you cut this or why it works? Like I just did it like 2 months ago at this place and they're like, yeah, but people are there and they're just excited and might be
Yeah.
some drinking going on and everybody just
Yeah,
but
it's different when you read something and you get that response, but then people see it on the page and they don't really get what you meant. And
oh
so,
yeah, yeah.
and especially for out there reading from our work, which I don't do it as much as I used to, not nearly. I'll be back and I'm starting to do it more because of the book. But and also because of Library Girl, that's my work has taken a back seat for so long intentionally. And so, but I mean, I remember writing pieces and presenting them out loud for the first time as opposed to getting them published before reading them, and which is informative. I mean, it becomes an instant collaboration like playwriting, where you actually can have a conversation with people after and they say that really touched me, or what was that about, or whatever. But I you can get addicted to that and not really focus on making the right creating the right sentences.
Oh,
Um,
for sure. For sure. I'm sure
yeah,
at some point, like a lot of you know, I'm not originally from California, but I know, having moved here years ago and hearing the stories about, local legends and beat poets of the past and everything. And I'm sure at some point, like Bukowski could have probably read the freaking like Campbell soup can ingredients. People would have been like, genius. You know what I
exactly.
mean? And it's like nothing to
I do
put
know what you mean.
what he
I
would,
saw, I got to
yeah.
see him read. That was one of the highlights of my life was getting to see him read.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not like taking anything away from him, but it's just I think like that groundswell of local celebrity and people are just like, whatever he wants to do is fine with us.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's something that I think some of us who've been in that world of reading struggle with, which is something is well received and then it doesn't really work necessarily the same way on the page when someone else is reading it. So that was interesting in terms of the creation of this book. By the way, the book isn't. I'm a poet, but I'm also a playwright and a short story writer and an essayist, and I write these fragments, like almost like micro memoirs. So the book is a hybrid. It's a lyrical memoir, but it's a hybrid of many of is a reflection of how of the forms in which I write. So
Mm.
yeah, so it's not just straight poetry, and also my poetry. They're more like I call them story poems. They're prose poems, pretty
Excellent.
much for the most part.
And I've
Yeah.
heard you read several of those. I remember the poem reading about 1971 was a bad year. I think I saw that on another podcast.
Yes. Yeah.
Great,
Yeah.
great
Oh
poem.
yeah, that's prominently featured at the beginning of the book.
Awesome. I guess, and I do this with everybody, but take me back in your Wayback Machine of choice, and kind of take me back to when you were younger and you were first exposed to either open mics or maybe somebody gifted you a book. It could be, a book of poetry, a book of short stories, and then you started doing it yourself, and then maybe it was like, I don't know, a high school lit class or maybe a teacher or somebody said like, Susan, you kind of have a knack for this. Maybe you should think about, pursuing this.
Right. Okay. Well, I would say my first poet was Joni Mitchell. So I went to lyrics of songs to save me, and she's a poet, and I got to tell her that too.
Oh,
She,
wow.
yeah. I mean, I got to tell her she was my first poet, which I think really helped me view language in a different way. And I started, okay, then so that started, I think I was exposed to her in eighth grade. I had a friend who said, listen to this, and it was Ladies of the Canyon. So I heard
Um,
Ladies of the Canyon before Blue, interestingly enough. And I then shortly thereafter, a girlfriend gave me this book by this poet called Merritt Malloy, and she was someone that we all were reading at that age. Um, she had books called like My Song for Him Who Never Sang to Me or Things I Meant to Say to You When We Were Old, and they were very well written, almost like the best version of a journal. But she crafted these pieces and she had photos in them and they were perfect. They really reached a lot of people, these pieces, these books. And so she was an inspiration to me. I was always writing in a journal, and she helped me. It gave me permission, I guess I want to say, to explore more on paper. And then it just became an outlet. It just became the only outlet for me. And then I didn't really have a teacher back then that said, wow, you should be doing this. I was really thinking when I was growing up, I grew up in LA in the Valley, and I always wanted to be an actress. And that was my path. That was what I thought my path was supposed to be. But I was always writing anyway. And I had some friends say, you're a writer, like you should do that. But I just wanted what I wanted, what I thought I wanted. And so I ended up I was in acting class at a pretty young age, and but I was horrible. I mean, I was, was really bad. And I landed in this class with this teacher. He was kind of famous, Jeff Corey. He taught like James Dean and Jack Nicholson in the 50s. And he was still at that point, I think I was in my early 20s and he was in his 70s. And I thought he seemed like he was 110, because I was so young. And anyway, the thing about that class was that he wouldn't allow us on stage unless we knew the theme of each play that we read. And he'd just stop in the middle of the scene we were doing and say, okay, what's the theme? So you had to identify that. And that was a really interesting way of of reading and understanding what the writers was trying to say. And that got me writing scenes, and I started to take my writing more seriously. But between, like, let's just say high school and college, and I was writing little poems, and I was writing songs too that I didn't really show to anybody, but I was writing poems. And I had a friend who was a waitress at Froman's in Santa Monica, and she was a songwriter, and she ended up becoming a very successful, hugely successful songwriter, and she is. But she said to me, "You're a poet, and you need to send these poems out." And I was thinking, like, okay. And then she said, "Here's a place you can send your poems." And she gave me this name and this address, and it was called the Shatter Sheet. It was like a zine. And guess who was the editor? S.A. Griffin. I didn't know who he was. I'm talking about, I was probably 20 or 21, or it was really early on for me. And he published these two pieces of mine, and I was like, I'm a published poet, and I thought that this was it, and I was still pursuing acting. But it's so funny because I didn't meet SA until 1989, which is a long time ago, but it took a while, and I never even realized until even a few years after that he was Shatter Sheet, that he was the person behind it, or part of it, or I don't know if he created it, but he was the guy who said, I think you should take this line out. I think you should. It was amazing. Like, this was this person who would end up having a big influence on my creative life, and still does.
Mhm.
In fact, he's going to be reading at my book launch. He's a close friend. We're doing his book launch at Library Girl for my next show. I'm collaborating with Punk Hostage Press, and we're presenting his new book called Pandemic Soul Music. So he's just someone who's been in my life for so many years, but that he was the first person who published those little pieces. And at some point I realized I cannot continue thinking that I'm going to be an actress. Like, I don't know, I'm never going to make it. And it was a good thing. Like, it was a really positive thing to come to that and just be honest with myself. Very painful,
But
but also,
and I'll interrupt you there because, I also have a performing background, but I wanted to say, but you do read your work in public and you do go on a stage and you do wonderful shows like Make Your Own Fun. And you are on camera, so and you obviously are doing promotion. So I think you still get that kick, that fun of being an actress. You're still using those muscles, you know what I mean? You're still getting to kind of, on a smaller scale. It's not like you're doing a play or a movie or something, but you know what I mean? It's like you do get to just flex those muscles that.
it's very different for me. Like, I couldn't read or perform other people's words. I would get tremendous stage fright. And I still get stage fright, actually, every time I get up to introduce Library Girl, or to tell everybody after the show to come to the next one. I get the butterflies. I'm a very shy person, unless I'm close to someone. And so I wasn't able to overcome my stage fright to be a good actress. But I did end up marrying an actor, my first husband, and I used to run lines with him all the time, and he would say, "You're so good," and I'm like, "I'm not." And he'd say, "You're really good. You just never learned relaxation on stage." And so maybe he was right. I mean, I really feel that my stage fright was getting in the way. Plus, I could never memorize my lines. Even back then, like, I forget things now because I'm, getting older. So it's like natural to forget, like, what I had for dinner last night. But insofar as like memorizing lines, I could never really memorize. I just didn't have that ability. And so that wasn't going to work. And also, just I would get nervous. And so I get on stage and do a scene in Jeff Corey's class, and I was absolutely like frozen for like 3 minutes, and then finally it lifted, but it was over. I mean, people had lost interest, obviously. And so I started to read my work around town at a pretty young age. And I was also full of stage fright, but I knew what I was reading and what I had written. So there's a confidence in that. And I feel like it's a really different thing than trying to be another character. I could never embody someone else. I could only be myself. And I'm not saying that I'm successful at that all the time, but I definitely it's a very different process for me than being on stage performing in a play or something like that. So yeah, I mean, the hardest part of Library Girl for me is having introduced the show and actually get up in front of people. And I know that sounds weird, but I love creating the show and I love putting it together, like just asking writers and creating the container, the theme, the concept. But getting up there is still, I still get a little nervous at first, and then again, it lifts. But it's much easier than trying to be an actress. It doesn't. I don't do it like I don't need that rush of being in front of an audience to feel like my life is valuable.
Mhm.
Um, but I really thought that was my purpose, and it actually all started when I was 9. And my so I had this friend whose mom was an agent, and we were in elementary school, and we were just like out one day having lunch, and this woman, the mom of my friend, said, "Oh, I have to stop and drop off a check at my client's house." And we stopped at this mansion in Holmby Hills, and the guy was this very famous psychic called Peter Hurkos, and he like helped. I think he helped solve the Manson murders.
Oh,
He was that famous, and obviously very successful. He lived in this beautiful home, and I met him and I shook his hand, and he was very warm and sparkly. And then the next day, my mom said she spoke with this friend of mine, Allison's mom, who told my mom that Peter said I was going to grow up to be a famous actress. He saw it. And so she put that in my head. I mean, I'm not holding her responsible. I'm holding him responsible. He's been long dead. But anyway, he was real. He was real. I have to say that I do believe in certain psychics. And so not all, like 4% of them are accurate. I believe in heightened intuition. And so he had whatever he had heightened intuition. And that's what he saw in me. And I feel like I thought, okay, well, that means I'm supposed to do that because no one else, no one else was telling me what I was supposed to be doing. You know what I mean? It was like, it felt like a calling, but it wasn't. I mean,
but it,
but it did lead me to the next thing. I mean,
right, right, right. And the thing I was going to say and jump in here too is that even for somebody like me who's done acting for years and went to, I mean, I
blah,
went
blah, blah, blah.
I went to the whole second city rigmarole when
Oh,
Cleveland, and just even having to be in people's faces and pull things out of them when they don't want to volunteer things. But even I still get like nervous. I still get that rush of like, oh fuck, this is gonna be like a disaster, or I don't know, because there's that vulnerability of getting up there with a piece of paper. I mean, sometimes you're in front of people you don't know. Sometimes there's only 5 people. Sometimes you're just in a town you haven't been to, or there's a new reading, or it's a reading where it's like maybe the sky opens up and it rains and half the people don't show up and you're just reading for the staff, and there's that one guy in the back that's like half awake when you're done. That's just like,
exactly.
ugh.
I don't know how people do it. I don't know. I mean, it is more vulnerable when you think about it. It's so much more vulnerable to do that than to like be a character in a play. But for whatever reason, it was a reverse for me of just feeling okay with it, um, and kind of not caring. Like if I mean, feeling like this is what I have to do, and it took a while to get to this place, but I'm sure you understand it too, where you just sort of say, not everybody's going to get it, not everybody's going to respond, but that's not the point. The point is creating it.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it's the working on it, getting it out onto a page because you're going to go to readings and open mics and things like that, where if you have a 3 or 5 poem set and you're going to get crickets because it's just impossible, I think, for everyone to get everything on every level, and you just have to have that mentality of like, okay, on to the next one. Speaking of the
Exactly.
next one, because believe it or not, we're like halfway down already. Uh,
No,
Wanted to see if you might have a poem handy you want to share with us.
absolutely. Hold on. Let me see. Well, so yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying to find a spot here where the sun isn't just completely blinding
Are
us.
you getting the reflection from your screen onto
Are
your?
you getting it when you see me? Okay, because
No,
I'm
I always just worry because it's like I understand but I always say, pain is temporary because I just never want people's face to be in shadow. Like I have like 4 lights on me now, and so whenever I turn on the Zoom at first, I'm always like because it's just so much light. But I
yeah,
mean,
I don't have
you
a
look
light. I mean,
perfect.
it's not the sunlight.
You look like a painting. So,
You look great. I mean, I need one of those special lights
oh, the ring lights, like
too.
15 online.
I mean, I have one that someone bought me, but I think I need something a little more powerful. But anyway, here we are.
A Bud Light.
I Yeah. So, okay. I have a few things that I printed out, but there's a piece that I wrote, and I was I was struggling with this piece for years because so my first husband he was killed in an accident, a ski accident in 2008, and I wasn't able to really write the poems that came out, but I it took a while to really be able to write about it. And so I was struggling with this one piece for a long time. It had different names, it had different versions, and finally it came out, and I sent it to Claire McQueen of this journal, McQueen's Quinterly. Do you
Oh,
know
yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. Mhm.
A really great literary journal online. She's lovely. She's also a really good editor. And I was introduced to her by my dear friend Alexis Roan-Fanter from Poetry Cultural Daily. Anyway, and uh, so I sent it to her, and it ended up being a finalist in this um, contest she was having, I guess, and she does them periodically, and it's called "John Muir Warned You This Could Happen." Some things you once read about him in a guidebook have steered you to the quandary of this moment. Like how Muir believed a forest of wilderness was the key to the universe. Like how he said one should go to the woods for safety, if nothing else. Now you are saddled to a glacier of imperfection, a cross section of city and country, field and stream, a mountain man with a shelter dream, the quiddity of hubris. And you think you belong to someone. You write your story in indelible ink. John Muir said he wanted to go anywhere that was wild. And here you are in this naked sword fight of a marriage, this willingness bond, a magic wand that speaks in tongues with a dirty mouth, where sameness is your splintered rock, where you unlock the trail map of a lifetime. The mountains are calling, Muir wrote, and I must go. Those very words echo from the one you love, who resents the father of national parks for sauntering. Watch him as he ambushes nature like a cat on a cricket. Watch yourself as you pretend it isn't happening. Remember that primer in your old guidebook, The Responsibility Code, about cart roads, signage, and deep snow safety? Always stay in control, keep away from closed areas. But when you marry a man who builds quinzies with his bare hands, no compass, no beacon, off-piste, making first tracks, while ignoring the watches, warnings, the weather forecast, you're signing your life away in invisible ink. You think you belong to someone. You want to belong to someone. You tell him, John Muir walked 1,000 miles, but he always came home. He tells you, you are not alone in my backcountry ways, until he makes the smooth telly turns of his final run, and you find you don't belong to anyone.
That's great.
Thank you.
I have an affinity for Central California, and I've been to San Francisco many times, and I've been to Muir Woods, and
Mm.
I had a great time at the Magic Spot where the what is it the gravitational alignment or something is off with a magnetic. I don't know what it is, but you know you can kind of go in that little shack or something and kind of stand on the wall. It's at an angle. You know what I'm talking about? I think
I
it's
don't, but I've been to is that in the Muir Woods?
it's near there.
I've
Maybe
been to
it's
the Muir Woods, but when I was a little girl, so I don't remember that.
it's like just south of San Francisco, and I remember being there, and it was just kind of cool. And they said, I don't know, the tour guide anyway. It's always tough to know if they're selling you something or it's tinfoil hat fun, but it's like they say that I don't know how many, maybe thousands, millions of years ago, a heavily magnetic meteorite crashed there and kind of disrupted the natural balance there. And so it's just in that one area, and you can go and like literally you're standing on the wall, but then if somebody comes at another angle, it looks like you're standing up straight, and it's just like they built it at a certain way. And I don't know, just a tourist trap, kind of like the biggest ball of twine in Minnesota or something like that.
I need to go there. It sounds like fun.
But,
Definitely, yeah. Like if I was there at the Muir Woods with my family when I was a little girl, and my dad just protected me from anything that he felt was dangerous or weird. So, or he thought he protected me. He didn't really, but so he wouldn't have taken us there. No
oh,
way.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's totally safe. It's like tours and there's people everywhere and all that stuff. It's just a tourist trap or whatever. But while we ha while we have a minute, do you have another one you'd like to read, or
Sure. I'm trying to see.
I just want to make sure we get to another one because I know we get to ramblings and stories and tangents on this show, and the people I'm like, time's up, and they're like, but I
I have a couple short ones. Um,
that's good. Okay.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So what I did was in the book, I have these what I guess we call them fragments, and they're just like little pieces that don't go to the next level, but they're just sort of snapshots. And so here's a short one because they're short for the most part, and they're in italics in the book. And so this is called amblyopia. My husband had a wandering eye. At first, I thought he was checking out other women, but then I realized it was physiological. He had poor depth perception and an imbalance in his eye muscle. I think it's the reason he never had the acting career he'd wished for. With the looks of a leading man, he kept getting cast as a character actor. That wandering eye gave him mystery and danger. There was something a little off about him. His eyes didn't work together. He could never fix his gaze. Leaving the eye untreated for most of his life damaged his overall vision. When he wasn't wearing contact lenses, he wore Coke bottle glasses. Without either, he was practically blind. And then he got LASIK. I thought this will be the end of our marriage. I'd always been one big blur, but I quickly learned the naked art of backing out of a room. That's a true story, by the way. Um,
That sounds like the trick, you know, the old we use a static shot here or whatever, but it's totally the thing of like what's focus, what's not focus, and it's just the thing of and then slowly, acknowledging it. But it's like, did I really
yes,
see that anything really? And if my daughter's watching this later, I'm like, sorry, honey, I grabbed your bear. It was a problem. Anyway,
that's adorable.
go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Hold on a second. Want me to read another little one?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
Okay. I mean, uh, hold on. Okay. Uh, so this is just a another short piece, newer piece called Puzzle Box. She was like Jeannie Land, twirling behind a pink velvet curtain in costume. She was a private amusement with arabesque music in a girlhood setting. She was a woman's woman, a marvel to behold. Our exchange, that space between luck and fate. She was a serendipitist, her mission to initiate one's soaring. She was a symbol of her self made motto: friendship never ends. But wake up! Astonishment is fickle, charm, a shapeshifter. She was a projection with hidden compartments, fleeting as stardust.
Nice.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of dovetail into something that I've asked and talked to some other writers about, which I think is just a really interesting topic because just had a novelist on a couple of weeks ago, and she and I were talking about the pros and cons between like self-publishing and then just seeking ever seeking the elusive, publishing company. Um, and she had a really good, her name is Summer. She had a really good, well, this is just her take on it from years in the business was her advice to younger or emerging or first time writers is saying like if you have a novel manuscript and you're shopping that around, she's just talking about with the attention spans like dwindling and dwindling and dwindling and everything is flashing lights and TikTok now. She's saying self-publishing novels, and I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. I mean, that's kind of risky to put X amount of years of your life into something that's, 200, 300, 400 pages, and then it's like you put it out, and then a month goes by, and then nothing. And she's, I think she's right on about the shorter stuff and saying like submit to anthologies, websites, people putting out their first zine or something for poems and short stories and flash fiction because it's just easier to digest. But I don't know how do you feel about that with novels, with self-publishing that? I mean, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, well, you're asking the right person because
Yeah.
the first book that I had written a book of poems in my like when I was 27 or 28. And I didn't work hard enough to get it published. It was when I first met Chris, my first husband. And then I wrote a novel in the like in I wrote the first 100 pages of it when I was pregnant with Mason, my son, who's now 26. So, you know, um, it wrote itself is all I can say. I had a lot. I just knew that it had to come out. And I wrote hundreds and hundreds of pages. And the thing about that book was that I got an agent for the book when I was when I wasn't I'd only written 100 pages, I would say. And someone said, "Oh, you should meet such and such." And so I got this agent in New York who really believed in it. And so that was an incentive to complete the book. And then when I finished it, she tried to sell it. She got it to all the right people. It came very close to selling and it didn't sell. And I was more ambitious at that time in my life around this book. And it destroyed me. At that time, I was in my, well, it was 30s, early 40s. It went on and on. Like we just tried to sell it. And I got some great letters from editors or from publishers and editors at publishing houses, the top publishers saying, we loved it, but, and at one point it almost sold to Warner Books, which was,
Excuse me.
bless you. The woman published a book called Good Grief instead. And I remember thinking, because it was about a widow, and I remember thinking, like, who would want to hear about a widow? Not knowing I would be one a few years later. So that was kind of ironic. And then, anyway, the point is that I couldn't handle it. Like, it was just too much for me. And so I sort of set it aside. But then I got it. Then someone else said, "I have an agent for you." And this was like another big agent in New York. And I went through a hell with it and it didn't sell. So cut to after Chris died, I had submitted it to this Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award with Penguin Press, they did this thing where like write the great American novel. I had submitted it before he died, even though I was pretty much almost over, like I almost let the book go completely. Anyway, it made the first cut to like the first 865 out of 5,000 writers. And he said to me, it doesn't count unless you make the top 100. And then he died. And I made the top 100 with the book. Okay, cut to, I didn't win, obviously. And I ended up getting another agent who couldn't sell the book. And I thought, no, I mean, this book is not meant to be out there. Like, I'm not going to do anything more with it. And that's really when I was, you know, I started creating Library Girl and every month. And that became the focus, a really big focus of my creative life. And so, like, all this to say, I had people say to me, you should just self-publish it, just get it out there. And I just didn't do it. Um, I haven't self-published anything, but it's changed. I think it's come a long way um, from what it was. The
Mhm.
same way when I was a playwright, if you produced your own play and it was a vanity production, people judged you. But now it's different. It's all do it yourself. I mean, I wanted someone, another person besides me to publish this book that I just created. And it was amazing that it happened,
Mhm.
how it did, because I hadn't even finished a draft of the book. And Eric Moraga from Moontide asked to publish it. But I encourage anybody to get things out there any way they can. That's what I would say. I don't think there should be a stigma. I think, look, people record and release their own music. My son made 5 albums that he produced from the time he was 15 until his early 20s and released them by himself. And it's important to do your work and release it and get it out there. And what happens is, like, if it's a really good novel, a publisher or a press can see it and say, I want that, and re-release it. So at least it's out there for people to see.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I don't have judgment on that, except
Yeah.
I just have encouragement.
Yeah, there's really no wrong way to do it. And speaking of that, believe it or not, we are actually almost out of time. I told you this thing runs like a freight train. It's
I
crazy.
love it.